For the first time in a week, Jack Morrison woke to clear blue sky. Not the endless gray overcast that had blanketed Bastogne since the siege began, but actual blue, bright and cold and beautiful. He stared up at it from his foxhole, momentarily forgetting where he was, what had happened, why his chest felt like someone had carved out his heart with a dull knife. Then memory crashed back. Tommy, the bullet, the blood, the weight of his friend's body going still in his arms. Jack closed his eyes and tried to push the images away, but they wouldn't go. They never went. Every time he blinked, he saw Tommy's face. Every time he tried to sleep, he heard Tommy's last words, "It was worth it." Was any of this worth it? The sound of aircraft engines pulled him from his dark thoughts. He looked up and felt his breath catch. The sky was filled with planes, not just the C-47 transports from yesterday's supply drop, but fighters. P-47 Thunderbolts, sleek and deadly, their distinctive profiles unmistakable even from the ground. Close air support had arrived. All along the American defensive perimeter, men were emerging from their foxholes, pointing at the sky, their faces showing something Jack hadn't seen in days: hope. The weather had cleared, and with it came the full might of the United States Army Air Corps. Joey Russo appeared at the edge of his foxhole, grinning like a madman. "You see them? You see those beautiful bastards?" Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Germans are about to get a taste of American steel from above. About damn time." Russo's grin faded as he looked at Jack more closely. "You okay, man? You look like hell." "I'm fine." "Bullshit, you haven't slept since Tommy. Since yesterday. Doc's worried about you. Crawford's worried about you. Hell, I'm worried about you." "I said I'm fine, Joey." Russo was quiet for a moment, then he sat down on the edge of the foxhole. "Listen, Jack, I know you and Tommy were tight. I know this is eating you up inside, but Tommy died so we could live. You dishonor that by giving up now." "I'm not giving up." "No, then what do you call sitting in this hole staring at nothing? That's not fighting, Jack, that's waiting to die." Jack looked at Russo, really looked at him. The kid from Brooklyn had survived D-Day, Normandy, Holland, and now Bastogne. He'd lost friends too, they all had, but somehow Russo kept going, kept fighting, kept believing they could win. "How?" Jack asked quietly. "How do you keep going after everything we've lost?" Russo thought about it, then pointed at the sky where the P-47s were circling, looking for targets. "Because of that, because we're not alone anymore, because help is coming, and because the best way to honor Tommy is to finish what he started, to hold this town, to win this fight." Jack nodded slowly. Russo was right. Tommy had died buying them time for supplies to arrive, time for air support to come, time for relief to break through. To waste that sacrifice, to give up now, would make Tommy's death meaningless. "Okay," Jack said finally. "Okay, where does Crawford need me?" Russo's grin returned. "Same spot, the .30 cal. We're expecting another German push this morning, and Crawford says you're the best damn machine gunner he's got." Jack gathered his gear and climbed out of the foxhole. His body ached from cold and exhaustion, his hands were still stained with Tommy's blood, and his soul felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. But he was still here, still capable of fighting. And fight he would. For Tommy, for easy company, for everyone counting on them to hold the line. The P-47 Thunderbolts transformed the battlefield. German positions that had seemed invulnerable yesterday were being systematically destroyed from the air. Jack watched from his machine gun position as fighters screamed down in steep dives, their .50 caliber machine guns tearing up German trenches and tank positions, their bombs and rockets exploding among enemy armor. One particular P-47 caught his attention. The pilot seemed to be working methodically along the German line, hitting every hardpoint with precision strikes. Jack watched as the fighter dove on a Panther tank, rockets streaking from under its wings. The tank exploded in a ball of flame, its ammunition cooking off in a series of secondary explosions. The pilot pulled up, circled around, and dove on another target. Another tank destroyed, then another. The pilot was hunting German armor with the focused intensity of a predator who'd found a target-rich environment. "That crazy son of a bitch is having the time of his life up there," Crawford observed, standing beside Jack's position. The sergeant had a pair of binoculars trained on the air battle. "Must have knocked out 5, maybe 6 tanks already." "Good," Jack said flatly. "I hope he gets them all." Crawford lowered the binoculars and looked at Jack. "How you holding up, Morrison?" "I'm here, Sarge, that's all that matters." "That's not what I asked." Jack's hands tightened on the machine gun's grips. "Tommy's dead, I'm alive, I don't know how I feel about that, but I know I'm going to kill every German I can until either they break or I do." Crawford was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Tommy wouldn't want you to throw your life away on revenge." "I'm not throwing it away, I'm using it, there's a difference." Before Crawford could respond, the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery cut through the air. "Down!" Crawford shouted, diving for cover. Jack dropped behind the sandbags protecting his machine gun position as German shells began exploding across the American line. But this barrage was different from the ones before. It was lighter, less sustained. The Germans were running low on ammunition too. The barrage lasted maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. In the sudden silence, Jack could hear officers shouting orders, men checking equipment, the mechanical sounds of weapons being readied for action. "Here they come," someone called out. Jack raised his head and looked toward the German positions. Infantry was advancing, but not in the massive waves of previous attacks. These were smaller groups, more cautious, moving with the hesitancy of men who knew they were exposed to air attack. Sure enough, a P-47 spotted the movement and dove, its machine guns ripping through the German formation. Men fell, the attack faltered, and the survivors retreated back to their lines. The air support had changed everything. The Germans couldn't mass for major attacks without being torn apart from above. Their armor was being systematically destroyed. Their supply lines were being interdicted. For the first time since the siege began, the momentum had shifted. The Americans were no longer just surviving, they were winning. Jack was eating a K-ration, mechanically chewing food that tasted like cardboard, when the word spread through the defensive perimeter like wildfire. "Patton's coming, Third Army broke through, they're coming to relieve us." Men started cheering, hugging each other, laughing and crying at the same time. Jack set down his ration and felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no sense of victory, just a hollow emptiness where his emotions used to be. Russo appeared, practically dancing with excitement. "Did you hear? Patton did it. Crazy bastard actually did it. Turned his whole army 90 degrees in the middle of winter and smashed through the German lines. He's less than 10 miles away." "That's good," Jack said tonelessly. Good, Jack, it's over, we actually held." "It's not over until they're here. Until then, we keep fighting." Russo's excitement dimmed. Yeah, you're right, but still, man, we're gonna make it, we're actually gonna make it." Jack nodded and went back to his ration. Russo stood there for a moment longer, then walked away, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. 10 miles? Patton was 10 miles away. In good conditions, on good roads, that was maybe 30 minutes, but these weren't good conditions. The roads were clogged with destroyed vehicles, cratered by artillery, defended by German forces who were now fighting with the desperation of men who knew they were being trapped. It could take hours, it could take days, and in that time a lot of men could still die. Jack finished his ration and returned to his machine gun. The celebration around him continued, men allowing themselves to believe that the worst was over. But Jack knew better. The Germans weren't going to give up easily. They'd invested too much in this offensive to let it fail without one last desperate push. The hardest fighting was still ahead. Snow began falling again on Christmas Eve, soft white flakes that should have been peaceful but just made everything colder, more miserable. Jack sat at his machine gun position, wrapped in every piece of clothing he could find, watching the German lines for any sign of movement. Behind him, some of the men were trying to celebrate Christmas. Someone had found a small tree, barely 3 feet tall, and decorated it with strips of cloth and spent shell casings. Another soldier was playing a harmonica, Silent Night, rendered in breathy, half-frozen notes that carried across the frozen battlefield. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. But it wasn't calm, it wasn't bright. It was dark and cold, and men were still dying. Jack wondered what his family was doing back home. Probably gathered around the fireplace, his mother cooking, his father reading from the Bible, his sister Sarah playing piano. The warmth, the light, the love, it all seemed like something from another world, a dream he'd had once but could barely remember now. "Merry Christmas, Jackie." Jack turned to find Doc Hensley standing there holding 2 tin cups. Steam rose from both. "What's that?" Jack asked. Coffee, real coffee from the supply drop, figured you could use some. Jack took the cup gratefully, wrapping his frozen hands around it, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He took a sip. It was bitter, barely warm, and the most delicious thing he'd tasted in weeks. Thanks, Doc. Hensley sat down beside him. You know, I've been a medic for 3 years now, saw action in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, treated hundreds of wounded men, lost more than I saved. Why are you telling me this? Because I recognize the look you've got, the look of a man who's drowning in guilt for surviving when someone else didn't. I had that look after Sicily, lost my best friend there, a kid named Danny Foster from Nebraska. He stepped on a mine, died instantly, and I spent months asking myself why him and not me. Jack said nothing, just stared into his coffee. You want to know what finally got me through it? Doc continued. It wasn't time. It wasn't therapy, it was realizing that Danny didn't die so I could feel guilty. He died doing his job, and the best way to honor that was for me to keep doing mine, to save as many lives as I could, to make his sacrifice mean something. Tommy died because of me, Jack said quietly. He took a bullet meant for me. No, Tommy died because there was a war on and he was a soldier. He made a choice in a split second to save his squad. That was his choice, not your fault. I should have been faster, should have seen that German sniper, should have. Should have what? Been bulletproof? Read minds, Jack. You can drive yourself crazy with should-haves. Or you can accept that Tommy made a brave choice, honor that choice by surviving and finishing this fight, and carry his memory forward as something that makes you stronger, not weaker. Jack was quiet for a long moment, then he said, I don't know how to do that, Doc. I don't know how to let it go. You don't let it go, you carry it, but you carry it forward, not down. There's a difference. The harmonica player had moved on to another carol. Oh, come all ye faithful, the notes wavering in the cold night air. Around them, other men were singing along, their voices rough but sincere. Oh, come let us adore him, oh, come let us adore him. You know what Tommy would want? Doc asked. He'd want you to live, really live, not just survive. When this is over, when you go home, he'd want you to find that girl you mentioned once. Sarah, right? He'd want you to marry her, have kids, work your dad's farm. He'd want you to be happy. I don't know if I can be happy again. Not today, maybe not for a long time, but someday. And when that day comes, Tommy would want you to take it. Doc stood up, collected the empty coffee cups. Think about it, Jack, and try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He walked away, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and the sound of men singing Christmas carols in the middle of a battlefield. Christmas Day dawned cold and clear. The men of Easy Company woke to the sound of artillery, but for once it wasn't German guns firing at them. It was American artillery pounding German positions as Patton's Third Army pressed closer. Jack could hear the battle to the south. The distinctive crack of American 105 howitzers mixed with the boom of tank cannons. The relief force was fighting its way toward them, and the Germans were fighting desperately to stop them. They're close, Crawford said, standing beside Jack's position. Maybe 5 miles now, but the Germans know if they don't break us today, they never will, so expect everything they've got left. Crawford was right. The German attack came at 3:17 in the afternoon, and it was massive. Every available German unit in the sector seemed to be throwing itself at the American lines in one final, desperate attempt to break through before Patton arrived. Infantry came first, waves of them supported by the last of their armor. The remnants of several panzer divisions, fighting not for victory now but for survival, trying to punch through the American lines to escape the trap closing around them. Jack opened fire with the .30 caliber machine gun, traversing left to right, pouring fire into the advancing Germans. Beside him, other machine guns opened up, along with every rifle, every weapon the Americans had. The noise was incredible. The sustained roar of machine guns, the crack of rifles, the boom of artillery, the scream of wounded men. Jack fired until his barrel glowed red, paused to let it cool, then fired again. Load, belt, clear, jam, fire, traverse, fire. Germans fell by the dozens, but they kept coming. Some made it to within 30 yards of the American lines before being cut down. A few made it even closer, close enough for grenades, close enough for Jack to see the terror and determination on their faces. An explosion to his left. One of the American positions had taken a direct hit. Men were screaming. Doc Hensley was already moving toward them, always moving toward the screaming. Jack kept firing. He'd long since stopped thinking of the Germans as people. They were just targets, problems to be solved with bullets. He had become a machine himself, efficient and merciless. A German tank, a Panther, broke through the line to Jack's right. It was heading straight for the command post, its main gun traversing, looking for targets. American soldiers were scattering, trying to get clear. Then, from above, salvation. A P-47 Thunderbolt, the same one Jack had watched hunting tanks yesterday, dove out of the sun. Rockets streaked from under its wings, slamming into the Panther's thin top armor. The tank exploded, its turret lifting off and tumbling through the air. The pilot waggled his wings and climbed away. And Jack found himself laughing. Actual laughter for the first time since Tommy died. That crazy pilot had just saved their asses and he'd made it look easy. The German attack broke, not gradually but all at once like a wave hitting a seawall. They'd thrown everything they had at the American lines and failed to break through. Now, with Patton's armor visible on the southern horizon, the Germans began to retreat. Not a fighting withdrawal, a rout. They were running, abandoning equipment, fleeing north and east in whatever vehicles still worked or on foot through the snow. The great German offensive, Hitler's last gamble in the West, was over. "Ceasefire," Crawford ordered. "Ceasefire, let them go." Jack released the machine gun's grips, his hands cramping from having held them so tightly for so long. It was over. After 9 days of siege, after endless cold and hunger and death, it was finally over. He looked toward the south and saw them. American tanks, Shermans from Patton's 4th Armored Division, rolling up the road toward Bastogne. Behind them came infantry, fresh troops who hadn't spent 9 days freezing and starving and dying by inches. They'd held against all odds despite everything they'd held. Jack climbed out of his position and walked toward the rear, his legs barely supporting him. He found the collection point where the dead were laid out, covered with whatever tarps and blankets could be spared. He found Tommy's body still where he'd last seen it. Someone had closed his eyes, folded his hands across his chest. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, like the kid Jack had met at Camp Toccoa a lifetime ago. "We did it, Tommy," Jack said quietly. "We held the line just like we promised." A hand fell on his shoulder. Captain Winters stood there, his face showing the same exhaustion they all felt. "He was a good soldier," Winters said, "one of the best." "Yes, sir. I'm putting him in for a Silver Star. What he did, taking out that German with the Panzerfaust, saved a lot of lives." "Thank you, sir." Winters squeezed his shoulder once, then walked away. Jack stood there for a few more minutes, saying goodbye to his friend. Then he pulled the 2 letters from his pocket, the one Tommy had written to his family and the one Jack had written to Maria. "I'll make sure they get these," Jack promised, "and I'll tell them you died a hero because you did." The 4th Armored Division rolled into Bastogne at 10:32 the morning of December 26th. The siege was officially over. The men of the 101st Airborne Division, who had held against impossible odds for 9 days, were relieved. Jack stood with what remained of easy company and watched the fresh troops arrive. They looked so clean, so well-fed, so untouched by the hell that Jack and his comrades had endured. The new arrivals stared at the airborne soldiers with something like awe, taking in their hollow eyes, gaunt faces, and the haunted look that comes from staring death in the face for over a week. "You guys really held this place alone?" a young tanker asked Jack. "We weren't alone," Jack replied. "We had each other." The tanker nodded like he understood, but he didn't. He couldn't. Unless you'd been there in those frozen holes, watching friends die, fighting with the last of your ammunition and the last of your strength, you couldn't truly understand what it meant to hold Bastogne. Later that day, they were assembled for an official commendation from General McAuliffe himself. The general stood before them, these ragged, exhausted men who had achieved the impossible. "Soldiers of the 101st Airborne," McAuliffe began, his voice carrying across the assembly. 9 days ago we were surrounded by the enemy, cut off from supply, outnumbered and outgunned. Many people expected us to surrender or be overrun. But you didn't surrender, you didn't run. You held this town against everything the German army could throw at you, and in doing so you changed the course of this entire offensive. You stopped them cold. You gave Patton time to counterattack. You proved that American soldiers, when they stand together, are unbreakable." He paused, looking across the assembled men. History will remember the siege of Bastogne as one of the finest hours of the United States Army. You should all be proud. I know I am proud to have served with you. The men stood a little straighter. Despite their exhaustion, despite their losses, they felt it pride. They had done something extraordinary. They had made history. Jack looked around at the faces of his fellow soldiers, Crawford hard and professional to the end, Doc Hensley still treating wounded even though he could barely stand, Joey Russo grinning despite everything, and all the others, the survivors of Easy Company who had become his brothers in every way that mattered. They'd lost too many: Tommy, Henderson, Torres, Davis, and dozens more whose names Jack would carry for the rest of his life. But they'd held, they'd won. As the assembly dispersed, Jack walked back to his foxhole one last time. He stood there looking at the position where he and Tommy had fought together, laughed together, made promises to each other. "Rest easy, brother," Jack said quietly. "Your war is over, mine's not done yet, but when it is, when I make it home, I'll tell them all about you. I'll make sure they know what you did, I promise." The wind picked up, blowing snow across the frozen battlefield. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. The war was moving on, leaving Bastogne behind. Soon Jack would move on to the next battle, the next objective, the next test of courage and endurance. But he would carry this place with him, and he would carry Tommy's memory, not as a weight holding him down, but as Doc Hensley had said, as something to carry forward. A reminder of what they'd endured, what they'd sacrificed, and what they'd achieved together. Jack Morrison turned and walked away from the foxhole, toward whatever came next. The siege was over. The war continued. And Jack was still standing,